Alright, chapter 5. The world was upside down and bouncing. Gradually, as everyone's eyes came into focus, she realized that she was hanging head down, her face only centimeters away from the front left shoulder of a horse. The inverted position made the blood pound painfully in her head, a pounding that was accentuated by the steady, bouncing trot that the horse was maintaining. He was a chestnut, she noted, and his coat was long and shaggy and badly in need of grooming. The small ears she could see was matted with sweat and dried mud. Something hard ground into the soft flesh of her belly with every lurching step the horse took. She tried to wriggle to relieve the pressure and was rewarded for her efforts with a sharp blow to the back of her head. She took the hint and stopped wriggling. Turning her head to face towards the rear, she could make out her captor's left leg, clad in a long skirt-like fur coat and soft hide boots. Below her, the churned snow of the trail passed rapidly by. She realized her unconscious body had been slung unceremoniously across the front of a saddle that projected stabbing dulls into her stomach. That projection stabbing dully into her stomach must be the pommel. She remembered now, the slight noise behind her, sensed rather than heard, and the blur of movement as she started to turn. A hand, stinking of sweat and smoke and fur, clamped over her mouth to prevent her screaming. Not that there had been anyone within earshot to hear, she thought ruefully. The struggle had been brief, with her silent dragging her backwards to keep her off balance. She had tried to fight her way free, tried to kick and bite, but the man's thick glove made her attempts at biting useless, and her kicks were ineffective as she was dragged backwards. Finally, there had been an instant of blinding pain just behind her left ear, and then darkness. As she thought of the blow, she became aware that the ache behind her left ear was another source of throbbing, another source of pain. The discomfort of being carried along helplessly like this was bad enough, but the inability to see anything, to get a look at the man who had taken her prisoner, was, if anything, worse. From this doubled over face down position, she couldn't even see any features of the land they were passing through, so if she did eventually escape, she would have no memory of any landmarks that might help her to retrace her steps. Unobtrusively, she tried to twist her head to the side to get a look at the rider mounted behind her, but he obviously felt the movement, minimal as she tried to keep it. And she felt another blow on the back of her head. Just what she needed, she thought ruefully. Realizing that there was no future in antagonizing her captor, she slumped down, trying to relax her muscles and ride as comfortably as possible. It was a fairly unsuccessful attempt, but at least when she let her head hang down, her cramping neck and shoulder muscles felt some relief. The ground went by below her, the snow churned up by the horse's torn front hooves, and showing the sodden brown grass that lay underneath. They were making their way downhill, she realized, as the rider reined in the horse to negotiate a steeper than normal part of the trail at a walk. She felt the rider lean back away from her as she slid forward, saw his feet pushing forward against the stirrups as he leant back to compensate and help the horse balance. Just ahead of them, visible from her face-down position, was a patch of snow that had melted and refrozen. It was slick and icy, and the horse's hooves went onto it before she could sound any warning. Legs braced, the horse slid downwards. Unable to check its progress, she heard a startled grunt from the rider, and he leant further back, keeping the reins taut to still the horse's panic. They slid, scrabbled, then checked. Then they were across the icy patch, and the rider urged the horse back into its steady trot once more. Evelyn noted the moment. If it happened again, It might give her a chance to escape. After all, she wasn't tied onto the horse, she realized. She was merely hanging either side like a bundle of old clothes. If the horse fell, she could be off and away before the rider regained his feet, or so she thought. Perhaps fortunately for her, for she couldn't see the bow slung over the rider's back, nor the quiver full of arrows that hung at his right side. The horse didn't fall. There were a few more steep sections and a couple of other occasions when they slid, legs locked forward and rear hooves scabbering for purchase, for several meters down the slope, but on none of those occasions did the rider lose control of the horse or do more than whining in alarm and concentration. Finally, they reached their destination. The first she knew of it was when the horse slid to a stop and she felt a hand on her collar, heaving her up and over to send her sprawling in the wet snow that covered the ground. She fell awkwardly, winding herself in the process, and it was several seconds before she could regain her presence of mind and take the time to look around her. They were in a clearing, where a small camp had been set up. Now she could see her captor as he swung down from the saddle. He was a short, stocky man, dressed in fur. A long, wide-skirted fur covered most of his body. On his head he wore a strange, conical fur hat. Beneath the skirts of the coat, he wore shapeless trousers made from a thick kind of felt, with soft hide boots pulled up over them, about knee-high. He walked towards her now, rolling slightly with the bow-legged walk of a man who'd spent most of his time in the saddle. His features were sharp, almost almond-shaped eyes that slitted to almost nothing from years of looking across long distances into the wind and the glare of a hard land. His skin was dark, almost nut brown from exposure to the sun, and the cheekbones were high. Oh my gosh. Is that like a dead bug? Eesh. The nose was short and wide, and the lips were thin. Her first impression was that it was a cruel face. Then she amended the thought. It was simply an uncaring face. The eyes showed no sign of compassion or even interest in her as the rider reached down and grabbed her collar, forcing her to her feet. "Stand," he said. The voice was thick and the accent guttural, but she recognized the signal word in the Scandinavian tongue. It was basically similar to the Ireland language, and she had spent months with the Scandinavians in any event. She allowed herself to be raised to her feet. She was nearly as tall as the man, she noticed, with a slight feeling of surprise, but small as he was, the strength in the arm that dragged her upright was all too obvious. Now she noticed the bow and the quiver, and was instinctively glad that no chances had arisen for her to try to escape. She had no doubt that the man shoving her forward was an expert shot. There was something totally capable about him, she realized. He seemed so confident, so much in control. The bow might have simply marked him as a hunter. The long curved sword in a brass-mounted scabbard on his left hip said that he was a warrior. Her study of the man was interrupted by a chorus of voices from the camp. Now that she had the time to look, she saw another 5 warriors, similarly dressed and armed. Their horses, small and shaggy-coated, were tethered to the rope slung between 2 trees, and there were 3 small tents placed around the clearing, made from a material that looked to be felt. A fire cracked in a small circle of stone set in the center of the clearing, and the other men were grouped around it. They rose to their feet in surprise as she was pushed towards them. One of them stepped forward, a little apart from the others. That fact and the commanding tone in his voice masked him as the leader of the small group. He spoke rapidly to the man who had captured her. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. He was angry. Ooh. While he was obviously the leader of the small party, it was equally obvious that the man who had brought her here was also relatively senior. He refused to be cowed by the other man's angry words, replying in equally strident tones and gesturing towards her. The 2 men too stood nose to nose, becoming louder and louder in their disagreement. The subject was Evelyn, as from time to time one of the other would amplify his statement with a sweeping gesture that encompassed her. She stole a quick glance at the other four men. They had reassumed their seats around the fire now, their initial interest in the captive having subsided. They watched the argument with interest, but with no apparent concern. One of them went back to turning a few green twigs with fresh meat spitted on them over the fire. The fat and juices ran off the meat and sizzled in the coals, sending up a cloud of fraught smoke. Evelyn's stomach growled softly. She hadn't eaten since the meagre breakfast she had shared with Phil. From the position of the sun, it must be late afternoon by now. She calculated that they had been travelling some 3 hours at least. Finally, the argument seemed to be resolved, and in favour of her captor. The leader threw his hands in the air, and angrily, and turned away. Walking back to his place by the fire and dropping to a cross-legged position, he looked at her, then waved dismissively to the other man. Evelyn felt a small surge of relief, tempered by the doubt that she had no idea what might be in store for her. It seemed that the leader of the group saw no point in keeping her prisoner. The other men must therefore want to hold her for some special purpose. But what? A specific purpose? It was that question that sent a thrill of fear through her, but there would be no quick answer. The horseman took a length of rawhide rope from his saddle and now quickly ran 2 loops around her neck. Then he dragged her towards a large pine at the edge of the clearing and fastened the rope to it. She had room to move, but not too far in any direction. He turned her around, shoving her roughly, and grabbed her hands, forcing them behind her back and crossing the wrists over each other. Sensing what was coming, she instinctively resisted. The result was another stinging blow across the back of her head. After that, she allowed her hands to be roughly tied behind her with a shorter piece of rawhide. She winced and muttered a protest as the knots were drawn in painfully tight. It was a mistake. Another blow across the back of her head had taught her to remain silent. She stood uncertainly, hands bound and tied by her neck to the tree. She was considering the best way to sit down when the problem was solved for her. The horseman kicked her feet out from under her, and she sent her spiraling in the snow. That, at least, brought a couple of low chuckles from the men around the fire. For the next few hours she sat awkwardly, her hands gradually growing numb from the pressure of the bonds. The 6 men now seemed content to ignore her. They ate and drank, swinging what was obviously a strong spirit from leather bottles. The more they drank, the more boisterous they became. Yet she noticed that even though they seemed to be drunk, their vigilance didn't relax for a second. One of them was always on guard, standing outside the glare of the small fire and moving constantly to monitor the approaches to the camp from all directions. The guard changed at regular intervals, she noticed, without any discussion or need for persuasion. All of them seemed to take on an equal turn. As it grew to full night, the men began to retire into the small felt tents. They were dome-shaped and barely waist-high, so their occupants had to crawl into them through a low entrance. But she thought enviously they were probably a lot warmer than what she would be, sitting out here. The fire died down, and one of the men, not the one who had captured her, walked in that same bangly-legged stride towards Evelyn and tossed a heavy blanket over her. It was rough and carried the rank smell of their horses, but she was grateful for the warmth provided. Even so, it was not really enough for comfort, and she huddled against a tree, shrugging the blanket high around her shoulders, and prepared for a supremely uncomfortable night. Okay, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to read up to chapter 5. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 6, then please stay posted. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.